So we're getting into the question or the dispute between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai as to whether you can dedicate something. I was going to say by accident. Accident isn't quite the right word. Maybe without full knowledge. So someone who says he's going to become a Nazir and then he goes to a sage to have his vow released. And we're going to now, and we talked about, well, what kind of situations would arise when you might become a Nazir without intending to do so? Or, under what kind of false pretenses might you become a Nazir? And here's where the Mishnah picks up, actually in the fourth Mishnah of the fifth chapter. And we'll see as we go through this part of the chapter, we get right to the heart of the dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel as to what is the role of intention and thought and consciousness when making a dedication. But the Mishnah begins with a really, really prosaic example. Someone vowed to be a Nazir, and then he went to bring his animal. In order to find the animal that he was going to bring to complete the period of Nazirut. And remember that being a Nazir was expensive. It had financial implications. And the Mishnah here says Behem Tor, but it might apply, there are three animals involved. So it's not cheap being a Nazir because you have to bring three animals, a sin offering, a whole offering, and a olah, and a burnt offering at the end of your term, at the end of your 30 days. So it's not cheap. This guy vows to be a Nazir, and then he finds that the animal's not there anymore. He doesn't have the animal. He doesn't have the financial resources to complete his vow because he doesn't own this animal's been rustled. It's been taken away. And the Mishnah rules. Very interesting because the Mishnah is now going to focus on physical reality rather than halachic reality. And very often, for example, in Kashrut, we very often focus on halachic reality. But here, the Mishnah is going to focus on, it's going to go into physical reality. If he'd vowed before his animal was stolen, so we don't really know when this animal was stolen. It's a bit like the Schrödinger's cat type situation. But if he had made the vow before his animal was stolen, Harez Nazir, he's a Nazir. Im nadar not Nazir. If he vowed after his animal was stolen, he's not a Nazir. So we are going to check the physical reality of the time when he made the vow and the time that the animal was stolen. And now we're going to reinforce this with a story about Nahum Hammadi. Now, Nahum Hammadi is someone when we know he's from the time of Yochanan ben Zakkai. So he's from the crossover period just before and after the temple was destroyed. Yeah, contemporary of Yochanan ben Zakkai. This was the mistake that Nahum the Hammadi made. Or the Mede made. Whether he's really from Persia, we don't know. Nazirim came up from the diaspora and found the temple destroyed. Now, you can imagine, this is a disaster. If you've made a vow of being a Nazir, let's say for 30 days, 60 days, you're coming up to the land of Israel with your animal. You're going to sacrifice it. You're going to cut your hair is going to be burnt on the altar. You come to the end of your Nazirut. And hang on, lo and behold, the temple doesn't exist anymore. You're stuck. You're stuck being a Nazir, possibly for the rest of your life. This is it's a trap. You can't get out of it. And Amar lahem Nahum ha'ish Hammadi. So Nahum the Hammadi said to them, by the way, this is described by the Mishnah as a mistake. Zot ta'ut. Ta'an Nahum Hammadi. This is the mistake that Nahum Hammadi made. Nahum Hammadi asked them, Ilu heitem yodim shebeit hamikdash atid lecharev nazirim heitem if you'd known that the temple was going to be destroyed, atid lecharev, would you have become Nazirim? If you'd known that, if you'd had a bit of foresight, would you have known that, would you become Nazirim? Really interesting question, because of course, none of us, we don't have foresight. And by the way, remember in the previous example with the stolen animal, we look at physical reality, we look at the time he made the vow and whether the animal had been stolen at that time. We don't seem to assume that he somehow has knowledge of the animal being stolen. We look at physical reality. Anyway, Nachum Hamadi asks, if you had known the temple was going to be destroyed, would you have taken that vow? Amru lo, love. And they said no. V'hitiran Nachum ish Hamadi. And he released them. He said, look, if we'd had foresight, we wouldn't have made that vow. If we had foresight. And Nachum the Mahdi released them. And when the matter came before the sages, Amru, they said, when the matter came before the sages, they disagreed. They went back to physical reality. Whoever became a Nazir before the destruction is a Nazir. A non-Nazir. If he swore after the destruction, he's not a Nazir. So the sages go back to physical reality. Nachum Hamadi admits some kind of foresight. And we get into this question, the Schrödinger question, the foresight. Is that about something we might or might possibly not have known? With a much simpler example, which the Mishnah then brings next. There are people, a bunch of people walking along the road. And somebody is walking down to meet them. Okay, so you're walking, a bunch of people walking down the road, and you can see someone in the distance coming to meet you. So one of the groups says, Amar echad mehem, one of the groups says, Hareni Nazir shizeish ploni. I'm going to be a Nazir if that is Fred. And one says, I'm going to be a Nazir if it's not him, if it's not Fred. Really interesting. So these guys have made vows which are conditional, are absolutely opposite vows. And neither of them knows there is a physical reality there somewhere. Neither of them actually knows the physical reality. And they're kind of gambling here. And there's a few more and this is a group of people, right? So they all start making different vows. Hareni Nazir, she'echad mikem Nazir. I'm going to be a Nazir if one of you lot is a Nazir. She'ein achad mikem Nazir. I'll be a Nazir if one of you is not a Nazir. She'shneichem Nazirim. I'll be a Nazir if you both are Nazirim. Or she'kulchem Nazirim. Or if all of you are Nazirim. So we're making these vows based on reality that we cannot observe. Now, Beit Shammai Omrim Kulam Nazirim. Now we're getting to the heart of the dispute between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai say they are all Nazirim. Because either they've made a vow, so to speak, on a true basis, or they've made a vow in error, but they've made some kind of vow. So we can understand that. That's how Beit Shammai work. Beit Hillel says, very interesting comment from Beit Hillel, which the Gemara can't understand. Beit Hillel omrim eino nazir eila mishalo nit kayamu devarav. Beit Hillel says only those whose words were not fulfilled are Nazirim. That's very odd. Actually, in the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda in the Gemara immediately objects. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda in the Gemara says, Ema Misha nit kayamudu arav. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, let's read the Mishnah the other way round. According to the Beit Hillel, only the ones whose words were fulfilled should be Nazirim. But the Mishnah is quite clear, by the way. The text of the Mishnah is clear, and I checked a couple of manuscripts for you, and I promise you the Mishnah says, and all the printed texts say, Eino Nazir Eila Misha Lo Nit Kayamu Devarav. The only ones who are Nazirim are those whose words were not fulfilled. Rambam suggests perhaps Beit, we're referring here to the person who said, "Oh yeah, I'll be a Nazir if you are not Nazirim." So maybe his words are not fulfilled if that person's not a Nazir. It's not clear what. It's not clear what Beit Hillel mean. Rabbi Tarfon is another, by the way, contemporary of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, or a little bit younger. He knew the temple when he was a youth. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Ein Echad Mehem Nazir. He says not one of them is a Nazir, because none of them have made this vow expressly on a matter of actuality. And according to Rabbi Tarfon, and he, of course, quotes the Pesukim from Nazirut to back himself up, you have to make a clear vow to be a Nazir. If you're not vowing clearly, essentially Rabbi Tarfon is saying, look, all this stuff, if this happens and that stuff, it's all word games, but you have to vow clearly if you want to consecrate yourself as a Nazir. And if you don't make that clear, it doesn't work. You're not a Nazir.